X-Men 2 Clone Wars was released for the Sega Genesis and Megadrive in 1995 and developed by Head Games. It is a sequel to X-Men that was released on the same systems in 1993. That game in itself was fun and a very good X-Men title, unlike the abomination that was released on the NES by LJN. Thankfully, Clone Wars holds up the Genesis X-Men tradition and brings another fantastic game to the table. I remembered seeing this game in catalogs in stores growing up, and I was sad that I didn't get to play it until probably about 6 years ago, when I finally picked up a copy on eBay for cheap. I had played the first game many times because it was the first game I ever got for my Genesis, so I was looking forward to what Clone Wars had to offer. The story here is that the alien race known as the Phalanx from the X-Men comics are attempting to take over every living thing on Earth. They've already captured a lot of the mutants and are cloning them, so it's a race against time and it's up to the X-Men to stop them before the entire planet is taken over. As soon as the game begins, you are being attacked, so it gives you no choice but to start moving and learn how to control your X-Man. This snowy Siberian stage serves as your tutorial in learning the do's and don'ts of Clone Wars. The game uses 3 buttons, and their uses are quite simple. One is for your mutant power, which can be used as much as you want with no loss of life or limitation from a meter of any kind. The second is your primary attack, and the third is your jump button. After you finish a stage or lose a life, you're taken to a screen where you can pick from one of a few different X-Men. Each one of them are different and have lots of strengths as well as a few weaknesses. The fun is figuring out which X-Man is best for each stage. Some of them have very long-range mutant abilities, some can stick to walls, some have double jumps, and many other powers and moves. On the roster is Beast, Cyclops, Nightcrawler, Gambit, Psylocke, Wolverine, and later on in the game you can also choose to play as the badass villain Magneto. My favorites to use were Gambit and Nightcrawler. Nightcrawler was just overpowered as all hell because he has amazing mobility options and he's also quite strong. Plus he's a bit smaller in size, so he's much less likely to get hit than most of the other X-Men. Health is replenished by little Helix DNA icons placed throughout the stages, and if enough of them are collected without taking any damage throughout the stage, then the health gauge can be overfilled and make mutant abilities of each character much more powerful. It's very reminiscent of how Link's sword in Legend of Zelda is more powerful when he's at full health. So this makes keeping health maxed out a higher priority than in most games. The controls are thankfully really tight and the gameplay is fast-paced and smooth. It didn't take me long before I was zipping through most of the areas, even though this game is quite tough. The latter half of the game especially. Level design is varied, and there are different areas ranging from a complex where sentinels are being manufactured, to the Savage Lands, and a whole lot more. And packed in these stages are lots of boss fights, including Apocalypse, Tusk, Exodus, and Magneto. Now while the game does a hell of a lot right, it also does have some minor issues. One is that the camera could have used a bit of tweaking. There are a few areas that would have benefited from the camera being panned out a bit more so it wouldn't feel so cramped, and then a lot of the enemy placements wouldn't feel quite so cheap. There are a lot of times they just seem to attack from out of nowhere before you really have a chance to even react. You kinda have to know where they're coming from playing the game frequently. There also seems to be an issue where when you're heading towards the right side of the screen, you can't really see anything in front of you because the camera doesn't scroll ahead quickly enough. This can lead to some cheap hits as well. If you're going to drop down to a platform below you but you can't see what's down there, you can hold down on the D-pad and the camera will pan to show you what's below. This takes a second though, so it can slow down the pace of levels a little bit your first few times through. Clone Wars can be brutally tough at times. There are no checkpoints and stages unless you get to a spot where it lets you select a new X-Man. So if you die anytime before that, you will start the entire stage over. And until you learn the levels really well and what the patterns of some of the more difficult enemies are, you might be stuck on a section for quite a while. You only have a certain amount of lives that are spread across all the X-Men at your disposal, and once those are gone, it's game over. So use them wisely and don't give up. So would I recommend X-Men 2 Clone Wars? Yes, I would, even with the minor frustrations of the camera. It doesn't really detract from the amount of fun that can be had with this title, and it's one of the better action platformers on the Genesis. So if you have a Genesis or a Megadrive, and you don't have Clone Wars, I highly recommend you snag yourself a copy and help the mutants save the Earth. The game can still be picked up on eBay for pretty cheap, even with the box and the manual. So I recommend adding it to your collection and having some old school fun.